A brief history of cognitive psychology. Most of the concepts in cognitive psychology are old hats for philosophers who have picked over numerous and varied theories of the mind for well over 2000 years. For example, the Greek philosopher Plato believed that memories are like etching on the wax slate, and the people differ in the hardness and purity of the wax, which would explain why some people have better memories than others. This notion is interesting in part because there is no clear-cut distinction between the physical substance, which means the wax, and its function, which means to retain memories. The French philosopher and mathematician Rene Descartes gave us the famous distinction between mind and body, asserting that mind is qualitatively distinct from body as different as heat is from light. Although philosophers raised many fascinating ideas and often identified key issues that are still with us today, their methods simply were not up to the task of resolving many questions about mental activity. Philosophy rests on arguments, but science, unlike philosophy, relies on scientific method. The scientific study of the mind began in the late 19th century in the name of psychophysics. Ernst Weber, the German physician who is considered one of the founders of experimental psychology, he was an influential and important figure in the areas of physiology and psychology during his lifetime and beyond. His studies on sensation and touch, along with his emphasis on good experimental techniques, gave way to new directions and areas of study for future psychologists, physiologists, and anatomists. Psychophysics. Weber determined that there was a threshold of sensation that must be passed before an increase in the intensity of any stimulus could be detected. The amount of increase necessary to create sensation was the just noticeable difference. The amount of physical energy is necessary to produce a change in sensation. If the music is very loud, you must shout to be heard over it. Gustav Fechner. The significance of Weber's work was realized by Gustav Fechner in 1850, who coined the term psychophysics for the field which tried to quantify the relationship between physical stimulation and mental experience, and he wrote the book Elements of Psychophysics, which was published in 1860. Psychophysics contributed to the psychologist's maturation from being a child of philosophy to being an independent science with an own subject matter. Wilhelm Wundt. He established first psychology laboratory in 1879. Consciousness and qualities of mind. Wundt's student Tishner proposed structuralism. According to this, the conscious mind has three structures: sensations, images, and feelings. Sensations, which means the immediate experience produced by the stimulus in the sense organs. Images are the sensations-like experience produced by the mind. And feelings are the pleasant or unpleasant emotions of the mind. Introspection method. Introspection method involves carefully examining and reporting one's own thoughts, actions, sensations, and emotions, which are the structure or elements of conscious mind. William James argued that psychology should be concerned with not only the structure of the mind, but also how it functions. The conscious mind is like a stream, and he preferred to think of consciousness as a continuous flow and used the phrase stream of consciousness. Mechanism. Ideas of Wundt and James are completely foreign to modern cognitive psychology. Their idea ran counter to a widely held view of science known as mechanism. Understanding mechanism is important because it will allow you to approach why contemporary psychologists, almost all of them, are mechanists and so enamored with computer and brain. The implication of mechanism is that humans are fundamentally machine-like. The mechanistic view of Wundt about the mind was the one in which the sensory nerves were activated by the stimulus, and this activity reached the brain where it could activate a memory of previous experience. The activated memory is the conscious experience. The mind in this way becomes as automatic as a vending machine into which a coin is dropped, a switch is activated, and the product is released. The origin of memory research. Hermann Ebbinghaus, who lived in Germany, published the first book describing experimental research on memory, 1885. That's the name of the book. The first person to conduct scientific studies of forgetting was Hermann. He studied only one individual for his study. Actually, he did it for himself. To give himself a lot of new materials to memorize, he invented nonsense syllables like non-words like zat, zov, and kuch. The nonsense syllables invented by Hermann are used still for experiments on memory and forgetting. Hermann wanted to work with meaningless materials that would be uncontaminated by his previous learning. Hermann was a remarkably dedicated researcher. For instance, in one study he went through over 14,000 practice repetitions as he tirelessly memorized 420 lists of nonsense syllables and then tried to recall them after 20 minutes, 1 hour, 9 hours, 1 day, 2 days, and 31 days. Unlike Wundt and James, Hermann was in the mechanistic tradition of physical sciences. The concept of association which Hermann used to explain memory is pure mechanism. An association is a link between things. If one member of the associated group appears, the association is automatically activated, and that leads to the appearance of other associated members. For example, if the word grass is associated with the word green, and any time you think of grass, green will also automatically come to mind. In this sense, the contents of the conscious thoughts are mechanically determined. Some have complained that Hermann's procedure of rote memorization encouraged a view of memory as a passive registration of events. Memory does not operate in isolation, but rather is one of the cognitive process serving some goals such as comprehension or problem solving. The triumph of mechanism is behaviorism. By the turn of the 20th century, psychology had gained a strong presence in the United States. Although a number of historical important ideas and events occurred, the most salient of these was the school of behaviorism proposed by John B. Watson. He argued that private mental states like the consciousness, sensations, perception, and attention that we study through introspection method must be removed from psychology. Watson also rejected the technique of introspection because of its subjective nature. Psychology, as defined by Watson, would proceed as the scientific study of objective behavior and not subjective mental experiences like consciousness. Behaviors, according to Watson, are external, observable, and measurable. He believed that all behavior is learned through stimulus-response connection called conditioning. So this is how a reflex is created. It can be called as a reflex action or reflex arc. Another example. And one more example. So this is called stimulus response action or reflex action. The idea used by Watson are based on the model of reflex. A reflex is the automatic movement elicited by an environmental event. Watson took the reflex as the building block of behavior and argues that all behavior can be described as stimulus-response connections. The behaviorism school dominated the field of psychology for half a century. According to behaviorism school, all behavior is learned through the process of conditioning. So the reflex model had to accommodate the process of learning. The discoveries of Ivan Pavlov provided such a mechanism. Pavlov was a Russian psychologist who won a Nobel Prize for his work on the psychology of digestion. He never considered himself as a psychologist, but ironically his observations yielded one of the powerful methodological and conceptual tools available to psychology, particularly to behaviorism. This discovery has come to be known as classical conditioning. Classical conditioning essentially involves associating a previously neutral stimulus with a reflexive response. Pavlov began his experiment by ringing a bell and then immediately placing some meat powder or food on the dog's tongue. He chose the bell sound because it was a neutral stimulus, that is, one that had nothing to do with the response of salivation. After a few trials, the dog salivated as soon as it heard the sound, even if food were not placed in its mouth. So here is the pictorial information about the classical conditioning. The ability of the neutral stimulus to evoke response through conditioning gave the behaviorist the powerful tool to describe learning. So that's all for today, and thanks for watching this video. And if you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you so much.